In this video, I am going to discuss about expendable mold casting. So initially, what is expendable mold casting? It is the casting process where the mold has to be broken to remove the casted component. So when you break the mold, then it comes into the category of expendable mold casting. The first type under this is sand casting. So sand casting has basically a cope box and a drag box, where the cope box initially has to be prepared. You will have the pattern, that is one half of the pattern if it is a split pattern, and following that you will design the gate, runner, riser, spruce and pouring cup. So after designing all these things, it has to be filled up with the molding sand, followed by the drag. So the drag box also has one other half of the pattern and it has to be filled up with the molding sand. After both the cope box and drag box are ready, it has to be placed one over the other as shown in the picture. So after placing it, you have to remove all those patterns, gates and your runner, riser and spruce and pouring cup. After removing, it has to be placed one over the other. Finally, vent holes has to be made. So what is the purpose of these things? So pattern is required for creating the mold cavity, and gas vents are used for escaping the air entrapment which is present in the molding cavity. Because you pour a liquid material, so the gases has to be released to the atmosphere. So you have this gas vents, and gate will be the entry of your liquid from the runner into the mold cavity, and riser has two purposes. One is to just ensure whether the liquid material is completely filled up inside the mold cavity, and the second one is to just supply additional amount of material into the mold cavity whenever there is a solidification shrinkage. And you have that spruce through which your liquid material comes down and it joins your runner. And the pouring cup, it is the one where you have to exactly pour the liquid material into this casting. So this is the setup of sand casting method. So here the most important thing is the choke and spruce well, which reduces the turbulence effect of your liquid material. So whenever the turbulence effect is being reduced, then the mold cavity doesn't have any air entrapment, and then the final component will have zero casting defects. But even though achieving zero casting defects is very difficult in the case of sand casting, we can at least try to reduce the casting defects whenever the gating design, riser design and our casting design is properly performed. So this is the basics of sand casting method. So normally this sand casting method, after completing the solidification, you have to break this molding sand to remove the casted component out of this sand casting. So that's why it comes under the category of expendable mold casting. So the advantages of using the sand casting are it can produce complex shapes, and it is normally of low cost, and it is easy to operate, and it has a high production rate. And there are many disadvantages of using the sand casting. So one of that is poor surface quality, because you need an additional secondary process to enrich its finishing or to enrich the dimensional accuracy. And the proper design of gate and riser is essential, otherwise the casting defects will be predominant. And more number of interior defects also you can see in the mold cavity, that is after preparing the casted component. So this casting has to be thoroughly inspected before it is being applied to a process. So either you can go for destructive testing or non-destructive testing. for the inspection of those castings to find out what are all the damages which has been happened in the interior to the casted component. So this is the basics about sand casting process. The next type in the expendable mold casting is shell molding or shell casting. So in this process you use a dump box. So dump box is the one which has your molding sand, and over the dump box you have to clamp that by using a pattern. That pattern initially will be at a high temperature. So during this process the pattern will be fixed in the top of the dump box by using a clamp. You can see that in the picture. And after clamping this, since the hot pattern you are using here, if you tilt the entire box upside down, you can see that the complete molding sand will be deposited on the surface of your hot pattern. So this process has to be waited for some time, so that a small thin layer which is called as a shell will be deposited on the hot pattern. This happens due to the higher temperature. So finally, after a period of time, the entire dump box has to be inverted back to its original shape. So what we can see from the picture is, you can see a thin layer of molding sand which is being attached in the form of a shell in the hot pattern. So finally you can remove that clamp and you can take out that hot pattern aside. By ejecting that shell which is being placed over the hot pattern in the form of shell, the ejector pins can be removed and you will get the final shell. So these shells will be used inside a flask, so that will act as your mold. So you can fill that by using your molding sand, and interior to that you can pour your molten metal by using a ladle. And after solidification, in this stage also you have to break the molding sand to eject your casted finished component outside. So the formation of shell for casting of your component is called as your shell casting. So this is done for any type of complex shapes, and it should have particularly an axisymmetric position. That is, you can see the picture what type of component it is being prepared here. It will be axisymmetric. And the next step here is investment casting. It is also called as lost wax method, because here you use the pattern which is made up of wax. Initially the pattern has to be made by injecting that wax into the die. So you can see the first three pictures where you will have a die and the wax will be injected into the die, and finally you will get the wax pattern. This wax pattern can be assembled in the form of gated pattern, and then it can be inserted into a slurry coating. And after the slurry coating, you can cover this by using your molding sand. After this process has been dried up, then you can heat this entire setup to make your wax pattern to get melted, and it will be removed out from your mold. So this process is called as dewaxing, because you are removing the removing the wax from the mold. So after the entire process is been completed, now your mold cavity is ready, so that you can pour your liquid material into that mold. So this is called as your investment casting. And after every process is been completed, the solidification happens, and after the solidification is completed, you can break the mold to eject your casted component out of this investment casting. So finally you can cut off all your gates so that you can remove your finished component. So as I told you, this casting process will have poor surface quality, and additional secondary process is required for making a good finish or to have a good dimensional accuracy in your product. Finally, it will move on for your inspection, and for it will be implemented in the specific process. So this is called as your investment casting. But when you compare to the sand casting, the dimensional accuracy and your surface finish in the case of investment casting will be slightly good. So this is one of the advantage, and you can use this process for mass production because you can see here that you are using a gated pattern. So whenever you go for a gated pattern type, the size of the component should be very small. So a smaller component of complex shape, and it can be used for mass production, and the final component will have a high dimensional accuracy. So these are the key points of investment casting. So in this case also you are breaking the mold, so it also comes under your expendable mold casting process. And finally we are going to see about ceramic mold casting, where instead of that molding sand, we are going to use a ceramic mixed with a binders. So normally this ceramics will be made up of zircon, alumina and fused silica. So these types of ceramics will be mixed up with your binders, and it will be made as a molding sand. So this will be poured inside the cope and drag, and the same procedure which we have followed for the sand casting will be followed, where you will have all the gate, runner, riser, spruce, spruce well, choke and pouring basin. So finally the casted component can be prepared by pouring your liquid material into the molding cavity, and in this case you have to break this ceramic mold, which is made up of the mixture of ceramic and binders. After breaking that, you can eject your casted component outside. So that is your finished one. So why particularly we are going for a ceramic mold instead of a normal molding sand? Because ceramic, I think everybody knows that ceramic, the green strength of this mold will be very high. So it can withstand a very high temperature of the material which is being poured into the mold. Because you are using a ceramic, the melting point of ceramic is very high, and even a very large complex shapes, it can be manufactured by using the ceramic mold casting. So normally in industries they use valve bodies and impellers to be produced by using this ceramic mold casting. So this video completely discussed about expendable mold casting. Thank you.